We're going to talk a little bit about really about optimization today. This morning I talked about yield management and exchanges. And this afternoon we're going to talk more about optimization that we do for reservations and for guaranteed inventory. I've learned a little bit about cost per time and some ways that things are done here in Asia, and I think wanted to show you a little bit about how our platform works, and we can kind of compare. Um, First, I thought it'd be fun to talk about DoubleClick. This is a DoubleClick event. Um, and how we got here. Actually, if it wasn't obvious, AdMeld never would have happened if DoubleClick didn't happen. 5 years ago, it was bought by Google, 3.1 billion US dollars. It's one of the largest acquisitions in kind of the internet history, I think, especially for a software company. And so I thought it'd be helpful to look at some of the reasons behind it. So for me, personally, I actually, in many ways, work at DoubleClick because my boss is from DoubleClick, my boss's boss is from DoubleClick, and a lot of my coworkers are from DoubleClick, and I work on DoubleClick products, and so we're part of Google, but the spirit of DoubleClick is very much still alive, and it's an old company by internet standards, right? It was started in 1995, which means it's actually older than Google, right? There are people who are actually working at Google today who are from DoubleClick whose entire time that they've been working at DoubleClick is older than the company. So what was going on? Why did Google pay all this money for DoubleClick? And so the most obvious one, it was the leading enterprise platform for advertising. And I think DoubleClick had really gone the enterprise route, had really tried to build generic enterprise products much more than any other company. Most other companies, they created an ad network, or these days you would say they created a DSP or an SSP. DoubleClick had that, but they also went very, very big on enterprise products and were very good at it. The second piece is targeting, and I'm going to talk about targeting a bunch today. But before DoubleClick, what Google was known for was contextual targeting, right? AdSense would scan your page, pick out keywords, and then you could target to those keywords. What DoubleClick was famous for was targeting cookies, was targeting advertising to users directly. And it was a completely different type of technology and different type of kind of philosophy for how to run your business. And the two were very complementary. As a whole, they worked together very well. And so DoubleClick brought cookies essentially to Google. Also, the scale of the DoubleClick cookie, I don't know the numbers offhand, but it was just, most internet users have a DoubleClick cookie on their browser. And lastly, but not least, as I mentioned before, team, many of which are still there. A lot of really, really bright people, passionate people who have been working in the internet and ads for a long time and are still together. So back to the targeting for a minute. I think this is one of the most important things in all of advertising. And when you get targeting right, pretty much everything else goes right. The price gets higher. There's better efficiency. You don't have a lot of unwanted ads. The user experience is generally better. Users like to see ads that are relevant to their interests, right? And so it's a really important piece of what we do, but it's also very difficult. And targeting is relevant to optimization because it's overlapping, right? So if I'm a male, 39 years old, I'm in a group for that, a targeting group. I could also be a male who plays golf. Those could be overlapping groups. You could be targeting, two different groups with the same set of criteria, and it creates a lot of challenges. So this morning we walked through the basics of yield management. Now we're going to walk through the basics of ad selection and DFP, which is this is a nice gentle slide. So basically an ad request comes in and we gather some information. And the first thing we do is generate a list of candidate ads. And so that's going to be based on targeting, right, primarily, based on the geographic region of the user, based on the page that they're on, maybe some audience data that we have about them. All these serve to create this candidate. And then the magic part is this selection of the best line item. So let's look at what does it mean to be the best and how we determine that. So there's a bunch of different optimization types. I mentioned I know how CPT is very common here. The most common, I'd say, especially for premium ads in the US, is CPM, which is just cost per thousand. It's how much are we paying for the ads to be viewed, right? So 1,000 views equals so many dollars. From a platform perspective, what we're trying to do for CPM is maximize total revenue for the publisher. That's our job. CPC is you're getting paid on clicks instead of views. So it's a little more challenging because we now have to optimize clicks, even though we still have to think about things as far as impressions because that's the traffic that we have coming into the site. And then finally, CPA, cost per action. The publisher is only getting paid when one of the users actually follows through on an action. They fill out a form or they buy something. And so we have to keep these things in mind when we're actually serving. So let's walk through kind of a real-world example, and let me show you kind of how complicated this can get while trying to make it also understanding. So for our example, we're going to say we've got a campaign, and the contract says 5,000 impressions to be delivered over 72 hours. And we're going to make it simple by saying these other two things are true, but in reality, they're not always true. We're going to say we have 8,500 impressions available. So we have enough traffic to serve this. And there are no other competing ads on the same traffic. So this actually makes this quite simple. But even with this, I'll show you some of the things that we do. So if you were going to think about, well, what's the most obvious thing? What's the simplest thing I could do to deliver these 5,000 impressions over 72 hours? The simplest thing to do is just to break up each hour evenly and serve it over the entire lifetime. So, 5,000 divided by 72 hours, and then just deliver evenly. We call this, the engineers call this naive, even goals, right? Because it's not very intelligent, right? We also oftentimes refer to this as something you could do on a napkin, right? Like you could get out a pen and write on a napkin and figure out how it would be delivered, right? There's a big risk to this strategy, though, which is that it assumes that everything is going to be the same the whole time, right? But that's not often the case. So even is over here on the right. We're going to look at a few different strategies today, and we're going to look at them from the perspective of what is the risk, right? So I just mentioned that with even, we're assuming we're going to have traffic in the future, and maybe we won't. I'm also going to describe front-loading, which is a technique where we deliver more impressions early and then less later. And what that does is it offsets some of the risk. Because if my traffic starts to go down later, I'll still be okay. And then the easiest thing to do is just to serve the ad as fast as possible. Serve the 5,000 impressions as soon as I possibly can. That's usually a bad thing for the advertiser. The advertiser wants to have exposure for as long as they can. They want, if they pay you to do something for 72 hours, they want something to be happening every hour. They don't want you to show all the ads in the first 10 hours because they're not getting a good value from that. So even though that's the lowest risk, it doesn't work for the advertisers. So we have to find something in the middle here. Here's an example of what front loading would look like. Excuse me. So here we're going above the average. We're showing more ads early on, and then it slants down at the end. The advantage here is that this gives us some flexibility. If I lose some traffic here, or if I launch a new campaign that starts competing with the one that I have a little bit of space here. So it's a lower risk strategy than just going with the naive. But the reality, right, is that traffic is not even. And these are real graphs from 4 DFP publishers. And there's a week on each one of those, so each one of these spikes is a day. So you can see a couple of things here, different trends if you look. For example, for a lot of folks, weekends tend to be lower than during the week. You have the fluctuation of day and night that you can see very clearly. This one is pretty crazy, right? So this is one day has a lot more traffic than any of the other days, right? This is sports does this, right? If you have football or something like that, on game day they get a ton of traffic and then much less the rest of the week. So we can't just be naive, right? We can't just do the same thing every day if this is the actual traffic that's coming in. And so the answer is to actually blend the two strategies. Let me walk you through what's happening here. The gray lines are the actual traffic that's coming into your site. And so we could see for 3 days. So we could see during the business hours it goes up, and then at night it goes down. That's very normal. The green line is what we talked about first, just being naive, showing the same amount every time. And you can see how that is so much different than the traffic. Here, it's impossible, right? I can't show more ads than I have traffic in a given hour. So this won't even work. And then here, I have way more traffic than I'm showing. And so the blue is what we would normally do, which is to spread out the traffic evenly, but keep in mind, what is the shape? I want to be delivering ads that are realistic with the shape that I have come into my site. You may be wondering, how do we know what the shape is? We know what the shape is by looking at history, right? And by analyzing the events from the past and establishing trends. And then finally, I mentioned front loading. You can see front loading happening here, where early on in this orange, it's going above the average, and then about the same, and then lower. So this is how DFP thinks about delivery of an ad in a very simplistic example. But there's more to think about than the things that we talked about. There's click-through rates and actions that we need, conversions that we need to analyze if we're doing CPC or cost per action. We can't just think about it as impressions. We have to think about it as clicks and conversions as well. There's viewable impressions. This is we heard a few mentions of our ActiveView product this morning. We think in the next few years, in the US, this is going to be the primary way that impressions are counted. So some of these impressions that I was showing actually won't be viewed, and we'll have to discount those, and we'll have to optimize against that. And finally, we've been talking a lot about the exchange and about backfill. And we have to keep that in mind as well, that sometimes RTB will bid, and it will be higher than what I have for my reservation, and it could take that slot. This is to give you an idea how impactful is RTB going to be in the world of DFP. For the US market, it's growing towards being 30% of all the spend over the next few years. So it is very meaningful, and we can't just serve reserved ads without thinking about RTB anymore. We have to think about how it will affect all of this optimization. So if we put all this together, I did want to mention a few things about why I think RTB is growing. The number one reason actually is targeting, since I mentioned that before. Because generally speaking, the DSPs, of all the traffic that they look at, they only buy 20% of it. Right? So 80% of the impressions that they see, they don't buy. And what that allows them to do is be much better at targeting, right? And to match up against audience data and have a lot of customized logic on how they buy. And that gives them a higher price. And I think that's really one of the biggest reasons why RTB is going to grow to be that percentage of the marketplace. The other is efficiency. Before RTB, if you wanted to change the price of an ad network, for example, you had to send an email or pick up the phone and call somebody. Or if you wanted to change the targeting, it was very difficult. Now it can happen on a real-time basis, and it's just much, much more efficient. We see patterns where the money can move around very, very quickly. For example, at the end of the month, usually the DSPs have a lot of budget they need to spend. With RTB, it just happens. All of a sudden, you come in the morning and the graphs go up. Same thing happens at the end of the quarter. And finally, because RTB is cleared by the exchange, as we saw this morning when I was talking about yield management, there's no discrepancies. So it ends kind of the arguing between the advertiser and the publisher about how many impressions were served. And that's really helping RTB win in the remnant space especially. So we have all these things that we're considering now, and just to review, we have all these different types of pricing in the reserved ads that we're optimizing for. We have this traffic shape that's very unpredictable and varies by publisher. As we saw, some of the sports publishers can have more traffic in one day than the other 6 days of the week. And finally, RTB is adding more complexity because some of the impressions, because they're being bought in real time, you can never expect when you're going to have an impression or not for your reserved campaign. And you have to keep that in mind. So managing all these things, we've only looked at kind of the simplest optimization that I could show you today, and hopefully have it be somewhat clear. And so if you think about cost per time, and where you're blocking out pieces of time to show a particular campaign, it creates a lot of restrictions, right? All of the optimization that we would do, like for traffic shape, for example, or because we anticipate a click to occur, and it could potentially interfere with that because you're hard allocating these blocks of time for when campaigns to show. All of these things that we do help publishers earn more money, right? Because we improve their yield, and we improve their optimization, so they get more clicks, they get more conversions, and they better anticipate the changes of traffic that are coming to their site. So it really does help them. To close here and to kind of lead up to our next presentation, I thought I'd talk about how do we look at the DoubleClick platform as a whole, because there are a lot of pieces to it. And so I'll just bring this whole thing up here. We call this the donut internally, but it lets you see everything that we do. So on the left-hand side, we've got advertisers, and on the right-hand side, we have publisher products. And then around this ring is where we actually have direct touch points with customers, right? So this is my product, DFP. We work directly with enterprise publishers, and we're their ad serving platform. There's also a product, Google AdSense, which works with small publishers, right? On the buy side, we have DFA, which is the ad server for enterprise level advertisers. And then we have Google AdWords, which is for small advertisers. What brings all this together and allows us all to transact is the ad exchange. The ad exchange has allowed all these different pieces to communicate and do business. And now you can have DFA buying on AdSense and AdWords buying on DFP. These things are happening, and this is part of what happens when you plug into the exchange. There's even more going on to this. One of the most exciting things that we have now is a common definition of audience between all of these products, right? So you could take an audience segment that was defined on DFP and see it on AdWords, for example, and you could see it anywhere. And we're really starting to see the benefits of having this larger platform. We're also going to start integrating DoubleClick products with some other Google products that you don't see on here, like Google Analytics, for example. It's a lot of work to bring DFP and Google Analytics closer together. So I thought I'd quickly at the end talk about, well, where is this going? What am I working on in 2014? Just kind of some themes. And where does the donut go from here? Maybe to something healthier, like a fruit plate or something. But so I mentioned integration before. We had the ad exchange in the center that was hooking everything up. We're actually doing more than just the ad exchange now. Things like programmatic reservations are going to require DFA and DFP and AdX to integrate even tighter than they were before. So there's a lot of talk about integration. Programmatic, you've heard that a lot today. It's going into everything. So any piece of that picture that you want to work with programmatically, you're going to be able to. And finally, the viewable impressions really is going to take off, I think, in 2014. And we have it baked into the entire platform. It's already on AdSense, for example. It's coming to DFP and DFA and AdExchange mostly in 2014. And so it's going to be, I don't think you can do viewable impressions unless you have it in every single product. But that's what we're going to have. And the one thing that I didn't put on here, almost because it's too big to be on here, is mobile, which is part of everything that we do now. And I think next year will be kind of, we're building for mobile first, is how we speak about it internally, where before you would probably do desktop first and think about mobile. It's now becoming the reverse. We'll be doing a lot of work on mobile apps, for example, and think about that even more than what we would for desktop.